I'm gonna need to take a sip of water before I start this review. I'm about to do a lot of talking. This book, where is this door stopper? Reasons I work out and go to the gym so I can carry around heavy books. Books of Yakob by Olga Tokarczuk. Wasn't that satisfying? Do one more time. Satisfying. This is, as you can tell by the length when you clicked on this video to watch this review, this is going to be a very, very, very long review. It took me a total of an hour and a half to outline it. It took me 2 hours to draft this review. A lot of quotes, a lot of themes. But I wanted to make sure that I covered everything that I wanted to cover in this review because this book took me 2 months to read. And a book like this, I think, deserves the time. I'm not going to ramble. There's no time to ramble. Let's hop right in. Also, disclaimer. I had to pull from some Eminem lyrics to help me with this review, but that will be towards the end of it because there's a very specific reason. That's just to whet your appetite. There are some people with whom you have a little problem from the start because... What? Yes, let's start that over. No, there was no typo. There are some people with whom you have a little problem from the start because you feel too attracted to them. You like them without any justification, even as you feel certain that there is a simulacrum, a game. That's the first time I've had to say that word out loud. Oh, let's go. I wish you could see how long this is. Okay. The Books of Yakob by Olga Tokarczuk. My throat's already getting dry. The Books of Yakob by Olga Tokarczuk. This is a massive piece of historical fiction that chronicles the tale of Yakob Frank, a Jewish man who broke away from Judaism and claimed to be the Messiah, who also has mysterious Polish origins. This is set in the mid-18th century, and Yakob's religious conglomeration that combines bits from Judaism and the Torah, the Catholicism in the Bible, and in Islam from the Quran, as long as some other things here or there, causes ruckus throughout the Habsburg and Ottoman empires. I'm just laughing because Yakob is a character. This is a real person, by the way. He was a trip with no luggage. Okay. He amasses a group of loyal followers during the age of the Enlightenment. And Tokarczuk's novel of Yakob and the Frankists. Doesn't that sound like a band name? Yakob and the Franks. Yakob and the Franks. Sounds like a band name. Somebody steal that. Highlights man's search for truth, but how the desire for knowledge and truth, coupled with a charismatic personality, can be corrupted, and it can descend into a cult that takes it far away from its original intent. This is a long novel, as you can see. It's also on the denser side, where there's a lot of theology and historical references and cultural references in this story from start to finish. Tokarczuk even includes images and art and maps from the time period that are relevant. And though it is on the denser side, I did find it to be more readable than I anticipated. So in order to tackle this review, I always am mindful of how I structure my reviews, and I try to let the themes flow one into another, and I try to group them accordingly. This is no different, but perhaps this is even more structured than the others. First, I'm going to tackle the book's themes of universal truth and knowledge, which then is going to lead into the subjectivity of interpretation when it comes to language, and then how that leads into the interpretation and subjectivity around religious texts and theology. how that gives way into human corruption, because I'm going to get into that later. This is just the outline, just to give you a heads up. How that leads into human corruption, and how all of these are really interwoven, which then will frame, all of this is going to be provided as a framework for this character of Yakob, and how figures like him come into being, or can come into being, given the right environment. So this is a very interesting time period in European history, set in the midst of the Enlightenment. And yet there are still very interesting conversations being centered around religion as well. So even though you have the Age of Enlightenment, you still had a religious cult pop up, while man is more so than ever perhaps pursuing logic and science. There is a push for knowledge, and not just at the religious level. Again, you have the scientific as well. And there are characters here, though, even priests, this is a Catholic priest in particular, who I'm about to quote from, who are seeking and desiring universal knowledge beyond the religious. Can such a thing as universal knowledge exist, is what Tokarczuk is asking. And can a population be universally educated to be on one page and to achieve a type of universal basis for knowledge? And who gets to determine what that knowledge is? What is the knowledge that gets put in a book? And who gets to determine what is universal knowledge for mankind? The priest answers modestly that what he would like is to create a compendium of knowledge to the sort that would be found in every home, and in it a little about everything, so that a person might reach for such a book whenever there is something he does not know, and there he might find it. Geography, medicine, human languages, customs, but also flora and fauna and curiosities of all kinds. One might conclude that everyone thinks alike, and after all, this is not true. Every one of us thinks differently and imagines something altogether singular when he is reading. Sometimes it unsettles me greatly to think that what I write with mine own hand may be understood in a completely different way from how I intended. Every book is a graft of new information. Knowledge should be useful and readily available. Everyone should have at least the rudiments of every indispensable subject. So if one is seeking universal knowledge, or you have characters within this story and within this novel who are seeking universal knowledge, does that mean that there is universal truth? These characters, whether they are Yakob and his followers, or some of these opposed people who are opposed to the Frankists, some of these Catholics perhaps, religious, not just religious leaders, but also political leaders as well, monarchies, who's in control of the state, they all believe that they have truth. Yet, if knowledge, as the previous quotes imply, is subject to interpretation, can there be a truth if everyone is viewing things from their own lens? Also, who gets to determine truth? Because those in power, or those with some semblance of power or esteem in a society or a culture or a state, will say what truth is in order to serve their own purposes, which is why people perceive everything in isolation, each object separate from the rest. Real wisdom likes enlightening everything together. That's when the true shape of it all emerges. Truth for truth's sake is not worth looking into. The truth in itself is always complicated. What we want to know is what truth we can use and how. So how is truth cherry-picked, again, for a particular purpose? People will take slivers of something that is true to prove a point, but take it out of a context as a means of control or a means to prove their own bias. The whole truth is in the philosophy of the Enlightenment and all the knowledge we can attain, knowledge that will free us from this misery. So one of my favorite themes in this book is the discussion of languages and how the language that you speak, or the languages that you speak, if you're able to speak more, if you're fluent in more than one, or have understanding of more than one, can either enhance or limit your expression based on a language's grammatical structures, its rules, and its vocabulary, it forces you to express yourself in a certain way or not express yourself in a certain way. Some languages are more limiting or confining than others. This is a very diverse setting that this is taking place in the mid 18th century. There are many languages being spoken throughout this story by different characters. Many of these characters are proficient or more than proficient in multiple languages. And you have characters from various backgrounds that are interacting with each other. So they may be interacting with each other, not in their native tongue, but in the tongues that they know mutually. So this results in a setting that produces an exchange of ideas, but it can also create misunderstandings, miscommunications, and tensions. Can you have a society that is truly blended? That's an open-ended question. Interpret that how you want to. At this point, it is a strain for him to put together an even remotely eloquent sentence in his native tongue. But by some miracle, he still thinks in Polish. And yet, for many things, he lacks the Polish words. He has had so many experiences in life that he lacks the Polish words to describe them all. He does this with the aid of a mixture of Greek and Turkish. Now, working for the Jews, Hebrew words enter the mix. But words and images must be flexible and contain multitudes. They must flicker and they must have multiple meanings. In Hebrew, things can get complicated by virtue of being so ambiguous. But in Polish, the things Naaman says in his sing-song voice as though reciting books from memory are also difficult to understand. The Polish language lacks the words for such questions. It has little experience with them and know little of theology. This is why every heresy in Poland has been unleavened and bland. In fact, no real heresy has ever come out of Poland. By its nature, the Polish language is obedient and to every orthodoxy. That is such an interesting quote. And again, Tokarczuk herself being Polish, she's making a larger statement here about perhaps her motherland. Perhaps that's a hypothesis of mine. So with all this subjectivity, how are religious texts to be interpreted, especially when they are written in the original languages? And you have them in their original languages, but you also have them translated. You also have, again, Yakob, who is combining principles from three main religions here, three main ways of thought into one thing. You have something that's written in Hebrew, in the Greek. The Bible is both written in, there's parts of the Bible that were actually originally written in Aramaic. You have the Torah written in Hebrew. And you have the Quran written in Arabic. So how does that impact the interpretation when the readers of these texts or the group of people following certain texts interpret knowledge and truth a certain way based on their own bias or whatever the case may be, based on their own views? On the other hand, one cannot agree with those who try to spread false claims, such as the notion that the scripture on paradise has mystical meaning only. In other words, that it ought to be understood in some metaphysical or allegorical sense. The priest believes, not only because he is a priest, but also from his deep conviction that everything in the scriptures must be taken literally. Whoever in this redeemed world keeps to the old Torah simply honors the dead world and the dead law. This man is the sinner. The Messiah will complete his painful journey, destroying empty worlds from within, reducing dead laws to rubble. We must just annihilate the old order so that the new one may prevail. Guess who was saying that? Okay. Remember, we got a cult leader here. I want the brothers who have wives who are not ours to cast those women aside and take new wives from among the true believers. And I want the women who married men that are not ours to take husbands from among our brothers. This is, again, Yakob speaking. This quote is a perfect transition into the next subject. Because in this particular quote, you have Yakob pulling from the book of Ezra that is in the Old Testament in the Bible. And it is specifically talking about men who disobediently married women that they never should have married. And they are giving instruction to divorce those women and to take on the women they should have. They actually had to, if you look at Ezra chapter, I think it's like chapter 10, right around there, they were disobedient. But Yakob, and there's a whole context. I'm not sitting here for a Bible lesson today. There is a whole context for their disobedience. But here, Yakob isn't talking about people who did things that they knew they shouldn't have done, and then they go did that thing anyway. No, he is taking something out of context for his own purposes, not because of disobedience. He, in a way, is a shapeshifter. And he has its own purposes for these things. And then he's adapting himself and his group of followers to customs to keep blending in to wherever they have moved to within the Habsburg and the Ottoman empires, you see. It's manipulative, really. And so he's taking this particular passage out of context, and yet he's still applying it in a way literally, right? To his own group, because he's interpreting it in a way to meet his own end. So he's still interpreting something, saying he's taking it literally, but he's taking it out of context, meaning that human beings are subject to corruption and fallacy for their own purposes. I know that seems like word salad. I hope it made sense. How could it be that the gentleman for whom he managed the forest accounts, a decent man as far as he could tell, turned out to be evil? Why would he testify to a lie before the court? How is it possible that he lied under oath, and not about money or business, but on this, when people's lives were at stake? No one is really immune to human corruption. We can take what we believe to be true, how we're interpreting something, and apply it to a text, apply it to what we consider truth, apply it to knowledge, but that doesn't mean that we're right. And you can still take something, and you may think that you're right, or you may blatantly know that what you're doing is shady. And the end result is the exact opposite of what the initial intent was, or the initial purpose, or the initial meaning beyond that, say, that text is or was. Again, I hope this is making sense. This is not the lightest of reads. This is not an easy book to review. But I do believe that everyone can tell what kind of person he truly is. It's just that deep down, he doesn't want to find out. Okay, all of that now leads me into our boy Yakob. This is the setting, and these are the questions that Tokarczuk has framed in this narrative and throughout the narrative, and centered it around this figure of Yakob, who, from my opinion, as I was reading this book, he gave me the ick. He's a slimy character. He just didn't sit right with me, even this fictionalized version of him. He just gave me the ick. Ugh. Okay. And yet, he amassed followers. People were still drawn to him. He was still charismatic, right? People were drawn to him. There are characters in this story, in this novel, who didn't like him, but yet they were still, there's something about him. I can't look away. I want him to like me, right? He had an aura about him, and he has an aura about him in this story. Clearly, you have to have something that pulls people in to amass followers. We have this character and this person, Yakob, who take interpretation, truth, and knowledge to a place where their own ideology and how they've interpreted certain things, or what they have determined and deduced to say is true, and then people come and agree with that, or they follow along with it. But it gets to the point where it becomes so extreme that their ideology becomes its own worldview. And it almost comes to a point where they're isolated from everybody else because these ideas have spiraled into something that's strange, otherworldly, so that the members of that sect are really now members of a cult. You also can't deny this leader. The leader is always right. When somebody opposes Yakob in his own group, he can turn violent. Yakob is believed to be the Messiah amongst a certain group of people, allegedly. And so, regardless of how that leader, Yakob, behaves, even when he has deplorable actions, his followers and he himself always has an excuse for those actions. There's a reasoning behind it. My logic is undeniable. My logic is undeniable, right? These are not the drones you're looking for. So that is how they continue, or Yakob continues to get away with some of the things he's gotten away with, and yet still achieve a certain level of status in society, even up to people acknowledging him at the state level, or being curious about him, perhaps at the state level. There is a period in the book where he's imprisoned. But even so, he still has some type of favor. And while he's in prison, his followers are still out and about working for his cause. He actually ends up accruing quite a bit of money through support. He also ends up in quite a bit of debt. So yes, it's just this very interesting phenomenon. This is, at this point, again, to be honest, as I was reading this novel, Eminem lyrics kept playing in my mind. So bear with me, because I'm going to actually incorporate those lyrics into this review, because they just were on repeat, because they really do help back up in 21st century terms the phenomenon that was Yakob Frank, especially in this story, as Tokarczuk portrays him. I'm going to laugh, and I'm not even going to rap them. I'm just going to speak them, okay? A visionary, vision is scary, could start a revolution polluting the airways, a rebel, so let me revel and back. This makes sense. Prophets never come from within. All prophets must come from somewhere where, must suddenly appear, seem strange, out of the ordinary, be shrouded in mystery, like the one the Goyim have of the virgin birth. A prophet has to walk differently, talk differently. Ideally, he hails from some unimaginable local course of exotic words and untested dishes and unsmelled smells. It's the return of the, oh wait, no way, you're kidding. He didn't just say what I think he did he? Yakob plays little tricks to scare them further. His best one is when he asks them what they have in their pockets. One thing before I get into the next batch of quotes and Eminem lyrics is, yes, Yakob is not this character's real name or this individual's real name. He had a different name, but he renamed himself. And him and his followers will even change names as the story progresses, depending on where they are, etc., depending on what ideology or religion they have decided to present forward facing. Because then that gives them favor. It makes them look like they're blending into a culture more than they really are. The name Jacob, which is the name that he took on, the name Yakob, is also, it means trickster. Look at in the Bible in the book of Genesis, Jacob and Esau. Jacob tricked his brother Esau out of his birthright. Jacob was later renamed Israel. God renamed him. And that renaming, in that context, is a shift. It's a good shift, but it's a shift. But the name Jacob means trickster because Jacob was playing games. Yakob is playing games. So him giving himself that name, it was strategic. Look at him walking around, grabbing his you-know-what, flipping the you-know-who. Yeah, but he's so cute though. People are poor here, and because they're poor, they have grown suspicious. The poor man can't afford to place too much confidence in anyone. Before the fat man gets skinny, the skinny man will croak. As the saying goes around these parts, they want miracles, signs, shooting stars, water become blood. They don't completely understand that what Yakob Frank is saying. But because he is tall, handsome, and dressed like a Turk, he seems exceptional and he makes a big impression. My stomach is growling, you guys. After this review, I'm gonna have to get up and get a snack and then do my last video. I'm like a head trip to listen to because I'm only giving you things you joke about with your friends inside your living room. They all have a common secret. They'll know each other better than anyone. And as you know well, the human spirit is inclined to love, to loving, to connection. There is more powerful in the world, and they'll say nothing about it. They have to have a reason to keep quiet. They have to have something to keep quiet about. So there is a lot of sex going on within this group. They're having sex with each other. They're sleeping with other people's husbands and wives. And Yakob did that strategically. Is really almost like a form of blackmail. Again, it's a cult where if you step out of line, everybody can get implicated. So you better stay in line. They have a secret. They have a connection. It's a connection through the body. So there are things that only behind the scenes, the group itself really knows what's going on. There may be whisperings and speculations, but really only the group knows, and it's keeping them in line. The quintessential. I'm Slim Shady. Yes, I'm the real Shady. All you other Slim Shadys are just imitating. Because Yakob thinks he's the Messiah. He's over here telling people I'm the real Messiah. So he's Slim Shady, allegedly. And yet, keep in mind that he is a trickster. He's renamed himself Yakob or Jacob, which means trickster. And he even says himself, I am not who I am. I just couldn't resist. And I included the Eminem lyrics because that is what was running through my mind. And I wanted to incorporate that in my review so that you guys can see how sometimes I put a review together. So yes, Slim Shady lyrics aside, there is an interesting notion to draw here, and I'm going to conclude from here. Yakob Frank definitely stirred the pot. He was controversial and revolutionary, the one could argue deranged. And his thoughts and how he pieced things together and what type of shenanigans this group got up to. There were times when I read what his group was doing in this novel, and I was like, I'm definitely judging. I'm like, ew, I'm judging. Why would you do that? Why would you consent to that? Right? But they're in this cult. It's a cult. But his followers also truly believed that he was the Messiah, because he had successfully convinced them that he was correct in his interpretations of truth and knowledge, his interpretation of texts, that because he was the Messiah and he presented a certain way, he was beyond a type of corruption, even though he was quite corrupt. But he had amassed this aura about him that allowed him to gain the type of control and power that he had over others. He was just a man, and he wasn't immune to taking advantage of the loyalty and the following that he was given. And there is a character in this story that does call him out for being a fraud and say that you ended up turning into what you were trying to correct. And that person didn't get, you best believe Yakob didn't like that. I'm going to wrap up. Like I said, this is not the easiest of books to read. It is long. It's on the denser side. However, it was still a lot more readable than I anticipated. I am rarely intimidated by a book. But this is one of those books like, am I going to understand what I'm reading? This is one of those books that could be on more of the intimidating side. But Tokarczuk has the gift of presenting very dense material in a way that wasn't overwhelming. And though I didn't grasp everything in this book, it would take multiple reads and a lot of research to do that. She's pulling from a lot of texts. She's pulling from a lot of historical sources that I was not familiar with. Some of it I was, some of it I wasn't. But I never felt lost in this book, even if I wasn't grasping everything. And I didn't get confused by the characters. There's a lot of them in this book. And I don't think that it's necessary for the reader to know everything that she's referencing in order to understand the overall points of this novel. She's also very subtly funny. There are some moments in this book where I chuckled. She has a dry sense of humor. And her writing is tangible and palpable to the senses. She brings the environment of the Habsburg Empire and the Habsburg Empire, and the Ottoman Empire to life, where she's describing scents and the environment and the climates of these people and what people are wearing. It's very tangible. And I enjoyed being in this vast world of these empires in the mid-18th century. She really brought it to life. And a lot of these characters are very eccentric and incredibly flawed, but that also just made it very interesting. There's also the sense of the mysticism. There's a mysticism to this book, which makes sense because you have a religious cult leader here. There's something mystical about it. And at times it actually reminded me of Vana by Ottessa Moshfegh. They're not just in the mysticism of it and how you have these religious entities that have gone beyond what they really should have, right? And they're using that as a means of control. Perhaps those two books would be interesting buddy reads. That's where I'm going to wrap up. I'm actually so hungry to the point where I have a bit of the shakes. So I'm going to rectify that and then hop into my next video. But this is my introduction to Tokarczuk. This is my first novel of hers. I will definitely be picking up others. And she just knows how to weave a story together. And these types of themes, right up my alley. I gave it a 4 out of 5. And with that, I'm going to go ahead on and wrap up. I'm going to get my blood pressure back, my blood sugar, right where it needs to be. I'm getting really hungry. There's no way I'm going to be able to record this 4th video without some sustenance. And right up my alley. Thoughts and comments below. Thoughts and comments below if you've read it or if you're curious to read it. Thoughts and comments below. I'm stuttering. Feel free to follow me on Instagram where I get up to more bookish shenanigans. And with that, I'm out. Bye.